good.
Give it 5 seconds.
Yeah. Okay. Go.
Okay. So who am I? For those of you who remember me from ColaSec, I work at Virginia Tech. I'm a professional faculty member there. I got my Master's of Information Technology from Virginia Tech, and relatively recently got a new job title, Director, Cyber Defense Operations. Sounds so odd, but
Congrats.
it works.
Fancy.
I know. And basically our responsibilities are everything that are on the defensive side. All our security operations, network monitoring, incident response, forensics, and we also build and deploy and maintain all of those tools that we use to do our monitoring and incident response operations. My email is there. If you guys have feedback or have questions on anything, you can always reach out to me. So actually, before I do that slide, I just wanted to mention that library and information sciences is actually more than just, yeah, I've probably say cyber a lot in this presentation. So I buckle up, everybody. The library and information science, it's not just the idea of, going to the library and getting your book. A lot of it deals with the technology that's behind the scenes in building systems to use and to maintain libraries and to find information. They do a lot of data warehousing. They do a lot of large data sets doing searching. And so there are different parts of the library. And this is kind of, though data is targeted towards kind of both sides of the library and then also the technology side. On the technology side, people need to take into account as they're designing systems, not just in computer science, but in libraries as well. And then we have a lot of practicing librarians that touch on, K through 12 in the public forum and in the academic libraries where they have to deal with a lot of these things. And so programs in library science are starting to try and incorporate a lot of broad technology into it and a lot of conversations about that sort of thing. So that's why we do what we're doing, and that's why this presentation got put together to be done to those classes.
So is this similar to like a big data analyst type role, or is this truly just for library type information?
So the front piece of this is pretty much security in general, kind of setting the table to talk a little bit more in particular about libraries themselves. So I'm not really targeting to that, but the initial, like the front part of the presentation would apply for anything that they would want to do. So I start off just talking about how widespread cybersecurity breaches are, and that is one drink for everybody. But this data is old, and I'm hoping to update it in when we get our new 2020 data, which should be out.
Is this presentation survivable if we drink every time you say cyber?
No, it's not. But through March 31st, 2019, they had 1,900 breaches, 1.9 billion records exposed. That was up by over 50% from the previous year. It'll be funny if you block the term cyber out every time I say it. That would be funny to hear on replay. But so the number of breaches is up. Web attacks are up. These are all things we know. The average time to ID a breach has actually gone down. It's now at 206 days from what statistics were showing over the last few years. That was over a year that it would take in order to get a data breach realized. And we've actually dropped down on the number of days it takes to contain to 73 days which is still not a fantastic number. But it does have a cost of almost $4 million per breach. And, their cybercrime, their businesses, we were talking earlier about phishing in the billions. We're talking across everything in the trillions. And that was last year, and I only suspect that to go up this year. It's really just the idea that, this is a huge issue that we need to look at. There are certain basic things that can be done, and those are things that are important. And I kind of outlined four particular things that I think would go a long way to securing, not 100%, but basically securing the low-hanging fruits of things. Unpatched operating systems and applications. You had Bluekeep that came out last May. We still have computers on campus that we can't get them to patch. And then now we're stopped even telling them, and now we're like, okay, you just need to get rid of Windows 7 completely and altogether. Phishing and other social engineering like email that we saw earlier, antivirus pop-ups, those fake ones that you get, cold calling people to do Microsoft technical support. I haven't seen that numbers on that, but I would suspect that that's probably going up too. As more people are moving to working from home, it would only make sense that we're probably starting to rev that up some more as well. Malvertising, that injecting those infected scripts or ads into your browser. Tim had a good one that he showed where that script was put in, and it even looked really good. So that's a big way that a lot of things are getting downloaded onto machines, or you're getting sent to sites that are causing other problems. And then, as we've talked, the weak passwords and bad passwords and the different things you can do once you have those lists of passwords, like password spraying and like that. I'm sure all of you know Have I Been Pwned? A lot of people in the library side of things had not heard of that site. They were quite amazed. But as of last month, they had 436 owned websites and 9 billion accounts that were listed on there. And that's a huge corpus of data. And it's a huge part of things that are going on. And, all of these we can address. Sometimes with very simple things. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. But they are kind of four of those problems that we really can address in some way, shape, or form. I mentioned Bluekeep and its vulnerability with the remote desktop. This is, it's really critical now as we have so many people working from home and so many remote support agents working to try and support them. That these sorts of issues can cause, all sorts of havoc across it. I believe the one of the LabCorp breaches, I don't know if they used Bluekeep for it, but they did use remote desktop services and compromised. They did compromise the organization and actually infect it with ransomware. Eternal Blue is still out there. A lot of people still have SMB version 1 running in environments. It's simple to turn off. It got a lot of publicity because it was leaked by the shadow brokers, along with a number of the other NSA tools. But people are still, it's amazing what people still are running on their systems that they don't need. They don't even have the backwards compatibility requirement. So they have all these things open. And we have zero-day exploits. We know kind of what these are, but a lot of people haven't heard the term. And it's basically these undisclosed system bugs that people have discovered and could use to compromise a system, but oftentimes they hold them back into reserve until they can exploit them on a large scale. And quite frankly, when you have things like Bluekeep not patched and Eternal Blue and all these other things, why would you waste something that you could use on a very big target to use on an everyday use when you have all these other methods you can do? Phishing, as Tim talked about as well, it's still probably one of the weakest ways to get into the systems of people. Trying to obtain information from them, usually getting passwords so that you can log in and scrape data out of whatever systems they have access to. They use a lot of social engineering to try and manipulate people into divulging that information. We had a couple good examples of saying somebody at work passed away and click this link to find out who it was. And you don't think about it, but there are even toolkits out there that leverage this open source intelligence to try and find information about people and literally target people by knowing who their bosses are, who they report to, if their job is a financial component in a university or in a corporate entity, and basically just going out and manipulating them to give them the information. The link at the very bottom, hacking a phone, it's the reporter who went to DEF CON and asked someone to see if they could social engineer their way into getting access to his cell phone account, and sat down and did an interview with the hacker. And while they were doing the interview, she called Verizon and pretended to be his wife and was able to get added to the account with all the financial information and was authorized to make changes on it. And she did things like she had a recording of babies screaming in the background and dogs barking and just creating an environment where it socially engineered the person on the other end of the phone to try and help them, to try and make their life a little bit easier. It's a short watch, but it's a really good one, and I do highly recommend it.
Gross.
We do have some phishing examples. This is the old, hey, I need to set up a bank transfer. Can you handle this so we can get this done? And they basically, they'll probably spoof the email address so that it looks like it's coming from somebody who should be making those types of requests. And if people aren't careful, they end up sending $400,000 out on a bank transfer when they really shouldn't have. This one is an invoice payment, and oh, hey, please update the account. So here they probably use social engineering to find out a vendor that you work with, and in a university or working for a state government, all of that information is published for transparency reasons. So people can go out and find out, what housekeeping service Virginia Tech uses, and then go find an example of one of their invoices, modify it, or modify it, put malware into it, have something run when people click on it and download it, because, oh, hey, yeah, we work for these people and they should be sending us an invoice. So again, if they're not careful and paying attention to it, they can easily get duped into finding it, or get duped into sending bad information. This one is an actual example that's out there about COVID. It takes partial advantage of something that most mail services do these days, and that's truncating the from address. So humanresources.uncg.edu@gmail.com. Well, many of the from addresses are getting truncated. So you lose the gmail.com. It looks like uncg.edu. That looks like human resources. I know we have this Corona outbreak and we're getting announcements all the time. I guess I need to click on this communicable disease management policy and see what's there. I would do what I would do, and what we have seen people do is I would take that out and do a fake login to whatever type of single sign-on service you use, grab those credentials and the two-factor, and then actually pass it to whatever the company's communicable disease management policy is. A lot of those are open and available on the internet, not behind an intranet. So especially at a public university, a lot of that has to be published in that manner for compliance sake. So it's very easy to have that sort of thing happen. Another version, this went out and it basically said, hey, here's safety measures regarding spreading the virus. It used the name of a well-known specialist who was working on the Wuhan Virus Advisory Council, and it was a legitimate document that talked about it. Unfortunately, that document was a PDF that had malicious script in it, called out to another website, downloaded malware behind the scenes. The people didn't know it was happening until it was too late. So these are a lot of things that you see, a lot of things that are happening out there, and they're taking advantage of the situation and the things that are happening. And so you do have to be aware of these sorts of things. Again, this is kind of tailored to UNCG. So I pulled some information so that they could actually report it if they get it. Whatever your email client is, and this goes for everybody, report it as phishing, report it as spam, depending on how your email client talks about it. If it is a business account, then get to your IT group and report it in the way that they would want it. And they probably publish something about how they'd like to get that information in. And in this case, they have a phishing page that they can collect the information and submit a report. Malvertising is where you inject infected scripts into ads or browsers and redirect from a trusted place to something that is not trusted. And you see a lot of this in Facebook. You see a lot of this all over the place. We like bashing on Facebook because it's fun, but basically any legitimate website can be used in this manner. And oftentimes it's used to spread ransomware. That's one of the big things that they're doing. They had Gand Crab, which was a big one that attacked hospitals and universities last year. It wasn't spelled, and that actually is an important piece of information because it's one of many little things that are used to determine and to identify who might have been the malicious attackers and whether or not it's a nation state, it's a group of cyber criminals, and so on and so forth. But it encrypts all the data, including any shared drives attached to that computer. And you have to recover from backup, where you have to pay the ransom in cryptocurrency. And those are really your only two options. Some of the variations early on, they used some bad cryptography, and they were able to find a way to reverse that. But they just moved on to a new variety of malware and ransomware that didn't have that issue.
Wait, so
Last year,
retired, and now someone invented Gand Crab?
it was always misspelled initially.
Oh,
Yeah. And so, yeah, they retired that that campaign in 2019 with what they claim, that group claims was $2 billion in ransom payments. And then shortly thereafter, a couple months later, Sodinokibi, I am butchering that, and I freely admit it, was kind of the successor to it. And when they did some analysis of the code pieces they found and the attack similarities and the misspellings on a lot of names and a lot of the same ways, they realized that that group never really retired. They just retired that piece of software and came back and did it again and started making money.
wow.
So yeah, it runs rampant, and if you don't have good backup policies, and you know they work, you could be in for paying a lot of money in cryptocurrency. There's also talk, a lot of people are like, well, just get your insurance, your cyber insurance to cover it. What they are starting to find is that with these, if their backups aren't good and they haven't been tested and they can't show that they could recover from it, the insurance companies are not paying the ransoms, or they're not covering the payment of the ransoms. Malvertising does all sorts of other things too. You can get a lot of potentially unwanted programs. Oftentimes these show up as plugins into a browser that hijack your searches and can do click results to make money. They get paid for every click they get. Sometimes you'll get these also downloaded with legitimate programs. It's all those, hey, would you like to install such and such? Well, you install this piece of software that has nothing to do with it. In one of these Malvertising campaigns, they had ad directs the user to all those tech support scams and exploit kits, banking Trojans. They had over 10,000 compromised WordPress sites that they were using to host this malware and redirect people to all of those WordPress sites. And they had them all over the place and they could upload software. And if somebody cleaned up a WordPress site, they just had 10,000 more to go with. And you think, well, shouldn't it be pretty simple and straightforward to deal with the bad ads and advertising? It really isn't. This is kind of a breakdown of how the ad market works. So you have someone who wants to publish an ad, and they come in and they contact somebody at an ad network like AdsTerra. They buy a campaign, and it gets resold through one of these ExoClick, Evo Leads. There are dozens of other ones, and they deliver the malicious ads. Well, on the right-hand side, as you look through it, it's the exact same process that you use for legitimate ads. So nowhere in this chain is anybody looking at what's being published and what that content is. They're just allowing them to resell and put that data out there. And so this is how it gets into Facebook. That's how it gets onto CNN. That's how it gets onto any of the sites that have ads. So any site is vulnerable to this sort of thing. So we also have this idea of weak passwords. We're really bad at passwords. I think everybody in the industry realizes passwords are pretty bad and pretty much sometimes useless. We get a lot of these rules where we have to do an upper character, lower character, special character. I need a number, but it can't start with a number, but it needs to have this. All these rules make it really, really hard for humans to remember passwords. And they're also easily circumvented. The number of times last year when we did an incident response for a compromised account, we would find that the local admin account on a Windows box was Hokies 2019 exclamation point. They meet our password requirements, but they're just bad. And there are actual papers out there that have talked about how our policies are actually weakening the strength of the password. And so at this point, I don't have to introduce XKCD for anyone here, but it's a webcomic for romance, sarcasm, math, and language. And the saying goes, there's an XKCD for anything. And we all know this one.
Jeff, I have a question real quick on the password. Did you say that you guys found out about that compromised one, or are you guys cracking passwords?
So what we generally would do in an incident response when we know that that has been the path that they got in, we will pull the hashes and we will crack them.
Okay, so you guys are doing. Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
We do ours on like a quarterly basis, and we look for some of the same things like you've mentioned there. And I know you have the SKCD, but I will say that Ralph, if anybody's familiar with Ralph, he probably gave me the best advice, and my password has never been cracked in any of our passwords. And I don't have super long passwords either. I will have like a 12-character password. It's to put a special character in between multiple words, which your next slide does talk about, like multiple words. But putting a special character in between each word has and we have to do a number too. So, you include in that. And it just makes it even stronger. But I along those same lines, in our experience, the ones that are getting cracked are the ones that are like 1, 2 words and a number, because that is what a lot of people are used to building right now as far as passwords go.
Yep. This is what we've seen. We've had probably 15 or 20 compromised computers over the last couple of years where it's Hokies and then the year. And most of them are local accounts. Because we're a university, while we do have some centralized Active Directory domains and some centralized LDAP services, most people just do local accounts on machines for the vast majority of departments. So they're not even using a lot of the services that are available that could help them out. So
I hate everybody.
it's kind of a nightmare. I'm not going to talk about the XKCD too much. I think everybody knows that one. But NIST has done something about it. They've come out with their new password standards, and the NIST 800-63-3B sets those new password standards. Minimum of 8 characters, maximum 64. It kind of loosens the requirements, really looks more at making passwords kind of longer and restricting some of those stupid things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and words like password that are commonly used. So, and the biggest thing is to restrict passwords obtained from the previous breach corpuses. So those 8 billion compromised accounts on how I've been owned, there is actually data behind that on what those passwords and you can actually set up things so that you're looking at those banned lists. Corey asks, why set a maximum length? Usually a maximum length is set mostly because you have to store it in some way, shape, or form, either in a database table or in an integer. So, you know, if you want to have larger than 64 characters, you would have to allocate the storage capability of that, and that can cause issues with scaling up the size. Also, once you get past about 64 characters, the entropy on that is at a pretty high level that I also have an XKCD for this, that people are gonna resort to another way of getting to that password rather than trying to just crack it completely.
Yeah, so we have a little bit stronger password at work, or password policy, and so we set minimum 15 characters. And so what people will do is, you know, using your example, they'll basically say Hokies 2019, Hokies 2019, exclamation point, and just you know, basically duplicate it, but the strength of it is probably worse, and it's still easily crackable, even though the length is much longer, which is theoretically supposed to be harder to crack, because they've just duplicated the same word and same number over, you know, twice. It's no stronger than just making it a short Hokies 2019.
Isn't it also in that NIST publication? Didn't they also remove the recommendation for regular password resets? Like, hey, you have to reset your password every 3 months.
They did, and that's been probably the hardest one for people to wrap their mind around. And I'm not even. We do an annual requirement to change it, and I think that's reasonable.
That's what I was going to ask, is if anybody's actually adopting that. 'Cause I'm kind of with it if it's stronger, but
it is, and unfortunately, you know, so one of the things that in password cracking, it's time, right? It takes too long to do. Well, if you never rotate a password, then now you have an infinite amount of time that you could try and crack that password. That's why I think recommending doing like an annual password change is probably a good idea, because you are rotating it. So there really is a limited amount of time that exists for someone to try and crack it.
Yeah, but to your point, like that you just made earlier, if it's at a certain point where it's going to take so long to crack, why am I going to spend the resources of my computer on that versus just like crypto mining or finding some other way to get the password?
To that, I would say that if you have a password that hasn't changed in 10 years, the technology in 10 years is probably going to be very different. once you throw quantum computers at things, once you start looking at other things, you may. Go ahead.
But I was going to say, there is the recommendation within that NIST policy that you should be, if there's a couple of recommendations. They just took out the timing factor of it, but they included that if there was a reason, like a breach or suspected breach, that's when you should trigger a password change. So I don't know of any company that's going to make it 20 years without having a suspected breach. And I mean, maybe yes, as long as no one's looking at it, but just because no one's looking at it doesn't mean you're not getting breached.
That's very true. Yeah. No, like I said, you could probably do an entire ColaSec meetup on everybody trying to debate whether we should rotate passwords on a regular basis or not.
Share your password, we'll try and crack it.
Well, so to that point though, I've taken like again, this is a self survey, but I've asked people like if it's longer but you have to rotate it less, are you all for that? And people are, much more inclined to do that. And I almost, I've seen the same thing that David's talked about where we've cracked 22 character passwords before, but that's because it was like password 123, password 123,
Yep.
right? And like some special characters thrown in there. So like I get that argument, but like it was actually fewer people were doing that than like people want to set a good password. It's just we have to really communicate it better. And if I can say, here's what you have to, I can make it more stricter to set a password, but you only have to do it once every once in a while. And like to Jessica's point about when you feel like there's a cause, and I think you don't go 10 years before you reset passwords, but usually people don't stay at a company that long. Usually there's not a reason not to change it at some point within a few years. So
again, some of this is from the side of coming from a university. We actually, only within the time that I've been there, did they require any type of password policy and mandated a change in password. So they went to an annual one. When they did, when they looked at the passwords and the last time they were changed in Active Directory and in their LDAP systems, they had people who were at 10 and 15 years of using the same password of 6 characters long. And they were, they had been at the university that long or longer. And they decided that it was good to start doing some sort of password rotation.
That's fair. I think setting like a year would be good.
But yeah, and that's the thing is, every 30 days, every 90 days, but 1 year seems to be like a reasonable amount of time. There are also other things that happen at a 1 year. A lot of people have to do security training annually. A lot of people have to do HR training annually. So it really does kind of fit into that idea of maintenance and maintaining all the things that are, company policy. What we ended up going with a year and a half ago is nothing shorter than 12 characters. Between 12 and 19, it can be, mixed uppercase, lowercase. But if it's more than 20, it can be anything. And then we do give those recommendations of passphrases over, passwords, things along those lines. But we also put in so that data of 8 billion accounts actually reduces to about 500 million known passwords that are out there. A lot of times there's a lot of duplication counted in the number of accounts that have been compromised. So what it really came down to about 500 million. And in real time, as someone goes to change their password, it actually checks to see if it's in that 500 million compromised passwords. And if it is, then it's banned from use by anyone on campus. Unfortunately, one thing we don't have is the ability to look back. And if we do have another 500 million or something new gets compromised, to go back through and easily test to find out if anybody has that set. I did mention there's another XKCD for what happens, and this is the one where you have your crypto nerd who builds $1 million hacking rig and can't do it, so they buy him a $5 wrench and say, go get the password. That's actually social engineering in a very extreme way, and it's probably more likely the way you would get someone's password if it's a strong, good password. And what do you do with them? We talk about cracking them, and I say passwords are rarely stored in plain text, but in a salted hash where you have it set up. You can build rainbow tables to try and help cracking, but oftentimes it's just brute forcing a password, trying combinations over and over again until you find one that works, and that happens a lot. But what you end up finding is probably getting social engineered passwords, getting access to them, and then doing password stuffing. And this is where they'll take a password that they find. They might get it from your email account, but they'll now stuff it into hundreds and hundreds of other types of sites to see if you reuse that password. They'll also take a look, and you know how we had Hokies 2019. You'll get Hokies, and they'll vary the year. You know, it's easy to see those patterns when you look at them. And so what they'll do is they'll try and stuff them into all sorts of websites to see what else they can get access to. And that's one of the big reasons that the recommendation is to not reuse passwords over and over and over again. So that portion was kind of the introduction to the security portions, and then I start talking some about the school libraries and the different types of libraries. In school libraries, you have a lot of labs. A lot of times they don't get a lot of attention, but if a student gets one compromised, then somebody else comes up and starts doing things on that machine. They don't have any idea if it's been infected or not, and there are often times where other students are actually the people who maintain the labs in a school library, and you don't necessarily get the quality of having those labs managed. You also have schools that teach coding classes, so you're putting Python, Perl, and PowerShell on these machines so they can learn all this technology, and those can be used to send spam, to do phishing, and other threats. It's called living off the land. It's where you come in and rather than downloading other tools to do things, you just use the things that are built in or installed by into the computer by the managers of it to actually do bad things. And a lot of networks in schools are probably not overly robust. You probably have lab computers sitting on the same network that accesses PII or FERPA protected data. You might even have a teacher who sits down at a library lab and logs into their grading system. And that, if some kind of malware has been installed on that, that could really be a threat to the data. And you could get in a good deal of trouble disclosing that information. And you also have something that we're seeing at businesses right now, because everybody's been sent home with devices and they're using them anywhere and everywhere. When they come home, it's going to be a massive attempt to try and clean those machines and make sure they didn't pick up malware when they were at home. And now they bring it into your corporate, or in this case, into the library, and have that malware spread when they come back to work or come back to school. Public libraries have a lot of the same issues with labs, although in public libraries, you often see them used by patrons to come in and fill out their tax forms, apply for government services, work on resumes, and a lot of that PII information can be left on those computers. You want to make sure when you have that situation that you're wiping data after a patron leaves, because you would not want anything left behind that another person could come up and access. I took a look at my library card, and it has a pretty predictable library card member number, and you can log into it, and the PIN is the last 4 digits of the phone number that signed up for it, or 5555. It's trivial to write something that could go and try and log into these. And when I took a look at mine, I was able to go in, and you could pay for, late payment fees. And I looked at it and I was like, I'm not so sure they are doing really PCI compliance with this type of thing. But then it did turn out that they actually they sent it to another site that I guess the third party was responsible for that. But one thing about public libraries, especially if you wanted to try and get the word out, public libraries already have training sessions, they have classes, they do all sorts of things. And you could probably work to put some kind of security training offerings in there. Lab hacking reminds when they would hack the Windows 3.1 computers in school using the default Windows password and replacing Explorer.exe with Solitaire.exe as the startup program. Yes, and fun ensued. Academic libraries, again, most academic libraries also act as a public library. So they're generally open and to anyone, but they have now a huge issue because they need students who have logged on, they need access to classwork, or they need access to other things to those computers. But you also have people who are guests. So they just come in and want to use the library, so they don't have login credentials. So how do you support both login and non-login access on a machine? And what does that do to your security posture when you do that sort of thing? And it's not great. But we find students, and we had, the last time I gave this presentation, somebody came in and just loved this part, because I mentioned that students leave their computers logged in all the time, and everybody was just, yes, it's ridiculous. They were like, the number of times I have to log out computers, just walk around the library and the lab and sign out computers is ridiculous. But it is a huge thing, because it's single sign-on that most of the campuses use. And if you're logged in as that student, you can pivot to their courseware program and you could drop classes, right? So if they have a scholarship and they have to maintain a certain number of hours a semester, and you drop all of their classes, that can have an impact on the way those things work. So there's all sorts of things along those lines that the academic libraries have to be cautious of. The other thing they have to be cautious of is access to export controlled information. And I went through their export control at UNCG, and libraries were mentioned 15 times in their FAQ. What you find, there are a lot of countries that do not have access to our academic journals. There are a lot of people who send foreign nationals to the United States to attend college so that they can get access to that data. They will run scripts that scrape the journal systems and download PDFs of all sorts of things, and then they'll send them back to their home nations. They'll even share those university credentials with people back home, and they'll access the journals from foreign countries. And while most of these journal providers, they actually check for that, they will notify universities, it's always good if you have controls in place in your library to try and detect that sort of thing before it happens. And so that is actually a huge issue that they have to deal with. And then they also have they have to support a large number of electronic devices. A lot of times, you'll have a phone, a tablet, a laptop, and then maybe some sort of gaming device per individual who's walking around on campus. that's a lot of devices that are in need for students, and sometimes they break. So sometimes they need to go and they need to check out an iPad from the library so they can get access to something. And you have to be able to manage those devices, those mobile style devices, when they're coming back into your library, because you have no idea what someone has done with it while they've had it in their control.
So how good is our background check on librarians? Because now I'm just thinking, if I ever get down on my luck, I'm just going to become a librarian. And people leaving their stuff unlocked just seems like a gold mine to me.
Good luck.
It is, and gets really kind of bad, especially on college campuses. You go through if you walk through the library. I mean, you walk through the library there on campus during exam week, and you will find computers plugged in with the screen open, logged in, with a backpack sitting in the chair, unzipped, and no one around. And you can sit there, and 15 minutes later, they'll come back. You're just like, why are you doing this?
They'd never know who did it either. That's the thing. I'm like, it's the perfect like way to just. Oh my gosh, there's so many. Oh
yeah, and they're like, oh, it's okay, or they'll, even when they're like, oh hey, I'll ask this other person in this Carol down, hey, do you mind watching my stuff? You have no idea who that person is.
Right. Yep. And I will say there are certain, it's not as many as students, but there are certain people at work that I'm just like, come on, man. No matter how many times you change your background to firemen, it doesn't stick.
So this is an interesting story related to that. I was in a class, and someone was telling the story about somebody like that. It was one of their finance VPs, and he would
finance people are the worst. That's exactly who I was thinking of.
He would take his laptop with him to lunch. He would go find a table, and he would set his laptop down with the screen open and logged in, and then go and buy his lunch, and then come back. And the CISO was, they had meetings with their boss, all sorts of things. He'd do it. He'd close he'd be good for a little bit and then start doing it again. And finally he looked at the guy when he walked into the cafeteria one day and said, all right, let's do this. You take off your wedding ring and you set it on top of that laptop, and then you go and you get lunch. If you're willing to do that, I will stop bugging you about that. And the guy was like, yeah, no, okay, you win. Because I would never leave something valuable like my wedding ring sitting out in public for just anybody to come and take. And He finally put two and two together and realized that laptop had access to very valuable things.
It's all relative.
Yep. Back in libraries, they're starting to use all sorts of Internet of things, which are fun. But they do provide a lot of easy access. There are apps that can tie into things like Alexa, where you can say, hey, Alexa, where is a book on so-and-so? And it'll actually know which floor in the library to go to, which stack to look at, and where it's at. So they do all sorts of things that are really good. But then there are some things that are kind of interesting. So they did Bluetooth beaconing in this one library, so they could tell where people went, where they stayed for the longest, what displays were the most interesting to them based on the Bluetooth beaconing, getting the Bluetooth MAC address, and being able to trace people as they walked through the library to find out which areas were of the most interest. And that just creeps me out.
I'm never going in a library again.
What's that?
I'm never going into a library again.
But when it comes down to trying to build services for someone, that information used appropriately, it was a gold mine for them, because now they knew they could tell which of their displays were most popular and then build new displays and new services based on that information. And again, they used Alexa in UNC Charlotte's library to help with accessibility needs. And of course, you know, you talk about that and it all creeps us out, but I do mention, you know, the privacy debate. Brookings Institution has a great resource for both sides of the argument. It's gotten things like the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. And as I like to tell everybody, that's the reason that you have to click on that cookie thing every time you ever go to a website ever. You can thank the EU for that one. There was a bill that went in on January 1st of this year in California that required appropriate passwords on consumer grade equipment. So no longer just use the MAC address on the back of the router as your password, or admin. They actually, if they were going to sell them within the state of California, you had to comply with this and have, you know, much more difficult passwords. But I suspect that kind of legal requirements will probably happen in more states. And I don't know, I'm sure we all like to read all the times when Alexa ordered something for somebody on Amazon when they were talking about it in the house. And in this one, Alexa heard a couple talking about somebody and sent the conversation in an address book to the person who was already in their address book. So it sent information to people they knew because they were talking about them in proximity to their Alexa. I like to give folks things they can do. I recommend using a browser that will do ad and script blocking plugins. That will change your interaction with the internet greatly. And sometimes it can be a pain, but in most cases, it's really good if you can get into that type of browsing the internet. Generate random passwords and use a password manager. If not, we recommend actually writing them down, but not on a Post-it note and under your mouse pad. But we actually make this little notebook that has all of our password requirements on it, and then it has a page for each service, the passphrase and the date that you set it, as well as the user login information. But it's meant to be put in your purse. It's meant to be put in your backpack or kept with you at all times, and not just sitting, you know, right underneath the monitor when you go in and you go home. If that helps you do longer passwords that are more complex and allows you to do better with them, then it's worth that risk of writing them down. There's a password card. I don't know if you guys have seen this. You can change the rules to match rules that you have, but the website will generate this, and you decide, okay, the symbol at the top is going to be used for Facebook or my email. And this card, what I do is I read down, and that's the random password that's been generated for the site based on the things that I put in. You keep that in your pocket or in your wallet, and you pull it out, and you can type those in. So it's a neat gimmick, and it's a way you can do that, to do it, and to remember complex passwords without having to actually remember them. And that's the password card, if you want to go look at that. We recommend changing default passwords. And, you know, when you get into this in a library, especially, everything is online. Your TV is online. Your projector is online. So most of the time, you would not log in and change a default password on a projector. You're not even going to use that functionality. So now someone can access that projector. And you say, well, what could somebody do with that? Well, you could be having a presentation, and in the middle of the presentation, somebody connects to it and puts up embarrassing pictures of somebody So there are, maybe not cybersecurity challenges with that, but there are definitely appropriate actions. We've seen that with Zoom bombing going on, where people are just jumping in to those things and putting up pornography or making loud noises and things like that. So again, we recommend not reusing passwords. Anywhere you can enable two-factor authentication, use it. Even if it's SMS, which is considered to be one of the worst of the two factors that you can do, it's at least better than a bad password with no two-factor authentication. Again, as with changing your default passwords, make sure you update both your computers and your TVs and projectors when firmware is available. And you can use a DNS filtering service. Cloudflare, actually the morning that I think I did this presentation is when they did their 1.1.1.1 family plan, which is a filtering DNS that allows you to block malware. It also allows a tier where you can block things like pornography or adult content. OpenDNS at Home is a very similar service that they provide as well. We use one that we built for campus. So right now, all of the people coming in on the VPN are all protected with a DNS filtering service when they're on that VPN. I also recommend the idea of, the policy of least privilege. We all know it from, role-based security. But, you wouldn't want to give a student the same access as a teacher. You wouldn't want to give an employee or a customer the same privileges as an employee in your systems. So why do you do this with your life? Don't overshare information. You want to get information out about the things you're doing, but sometimes we give too much out. What is your favorite color? What city were you born in? Best friends? All these are Facebook. And what do they sound like to me? They sound like security questions to get into your bank account. And if I know a person and I can get access to their Facebook page, I can probably find out way more than they want me to. And then I end with this. I need to find something better because this hasn't been updated in a while. I think it's about a year out of date. But this is the website where people go and paste their brand new debit cards online for everybody to see. And usually it's a two-pane view that has their name, the card number, and then on the back it has their security code, their CCV. This tends to get people because they don't realize that people are that dumb on the internet. But that's where I wrap things up. So thank you. And if you have any questions, you know how to get in touch with me. And I would like feedback if the flow is bad in the presentation or there's something I'm focusing too much on the security side that might not be appropriate for this. Let me know, and I appreciate it.